What's up, model gangsters? I know that I said I was going to do a two-part video series on the Special Hobby 132nd Tempest, but having gotten to the point where I've done all of the fettling and sanding and rubbing and adjusting and scribing and riveting, I felt like there was enough to talk about that it sort of deserved an intermediate video. So, part 1.5 is going to cover all of the stuff. And there's plenty of stuff with this kit. So, without any further lip flapping, let's just get into it and check it all out. Alright, as you can see, Big Bird is big. And there's plenty to cover, so let me see if I can get through this quickly and efficiently. Okay, so I know that I talked in the first part about joining the wing to the fuselage, and yeah, it was a bit challenging, but with the adjustments that I talked about making in part one, things did go actually better than expected. And I was pretty pleased with the way that it all turned out. All I really ended up having to deal with on the wing route, which for me is like the most important thing. Everything I'm going to do is going to be towards making a good wing route. And if I have to sacrifice someplace else, then I will. So, all I ended up really having to deal with was a little bit of a step in some parts of that. And what I did to deal with those was basically just come in with my number 10 blade and adds that down on the high side. And then I'm talking like maybe a ½ millimeter in some places. So it really wasn't bad. And the gap was nice and tight all the way around with just a couple of small adjustments. So I was pretty pleased with that. And you can see that it looks good on both sides. The step was a little bit worse on the starboard side, but again, you can see that I was able to deal with that fairly well. I came back just to make sure it was all nice and tight with some Mr. Surfacer 1000 that I painted into the joint and then smoothed over with a Q-tip soaked in Tamiya lacquer thinner. And that pretty much took care of that. There was a little bit more work around this area right here, especially once I put the inserts in for this part of the wing. Now I know that this is just, hot air on my part, but I really wish that Special Hobby had the resources to just go ahead and make the wing for each version rather than giving you the inserts here, because there's just so much going on in this area right here. There are, I think when I counted them, I think the number is there are 9 pieces that come together right here in this corner on both sides. And it's just, I mean, that's a lot under any circumstances, but the tolerances on these parts are just not tight, I mean, are just not loose enough. Like I talked about, for that all to just happen perfectly right out of the box. So anyway, that was probably the biggest challenge, was getting all of that tightened up in there, and I'm pretty pleased that it's turned out as well as it has. Same thing, looking at the bottom, I didn't have a whole lot of problems with these inserts. They weren't as bad as I thought. This one was tight. I had to take some material off of it, and it has a little bit of a step inside there in that corner there, but if I got to give something up, that's the place I'm going to do it, because it's the least visible. And the truth is that the sheet metal on these planes was pretty rough in that area anyway. It's just complicated shapes, whether you're making it out of sheet aluminum or plastic. This side was a little bit looser, and I ended up having to fill the gap a little bit here, which I did with some epoxy sculpt, and then came back and just rescribed the line a little bit. So not too bad there. The worst offense on the wing And this is something that pretty much everybody I know of who's built this kit runs into, because it's standard issue. It comes in everybody's box. And that is, you get a gigantic gap about 20 thousandths of an inch or a ½ millimeter wide at the back of the wing insert that runs right across the fuselage here. The good news is that there's not a panel line there. So all you have to do once you fill it is extend the existing lines across the joint. And you can see my joint's not perfect. I've got a little bit of a divot right there. I'm not going to worry about. For the most part, I've got it pretty well hidden, especially compared to the way that it was. It's just one of those things. And I also had a little bit of a step right here. And there were people asking me about it when I posted pictures online. And basically my response was, look, this whole thing is a story of selecting the least important edges and letting them be misaligned. So you obviously have to have good alignment at the front here, at the leading edge. You obviously have to have a good wing root. And everything that happens after that, you just kind of have to deal with. And the gap back here and the little step that I had along this, trailing edge of the wing root was just basically the leftovers of getting everything else to work the way that it was supposed to. So it is what it is. You just have to basically make your decision and pick your strategy based on what's most important. One thing I did do was I added a tube right here. That's the battery compartment drain tube, and I thought that was just an easy, neat little detail to add in there with some brass tubing. Now you'll also notice that I've got the rest of the lights installed. This one here fit perfectly right off of the sprue. It's just a round lens and it went in there just fine. This one, on the other hand, was a major disaster. The shape for the insert was basically correct, but it was just undersized. There was no way that the clear part was going to go down into that recess. And you can see that what I ended up doing was, it was easier for me to use a burr on my Proxxon and just enlarge the recess in the wing than it was to try and hold on to the little tiny clear part and reduce the size of it all the way around. You might have better luck doing it the other way, but you can see I managed to get it done, and with just a little bit of filler around the edges. It's already got the mask on there, so you can't see the inside of the lens, but that turned out okay. The next thing was dealing with the nav lights on the wingtips. And this is one of those things that frustrates me with almost every kit. It's like they're an afterthought and they're never well engineered, and these are no exception. And they don't fit very well. But the good news is that they're oversized. They stick out a little bit. They're a little too thick. And that's certainly better than the opposite situation, because then all you have to do once you get them attached is file them down or sand them down to the right shape, and then polish them back out, which is what I did here. I also drilled a little divot in the backside so that I could put some paint in. These things apparently came in two different ways. One was with a colored cover over it, and the other was with a colored bulb. So I went with the easiest way, because I'm going to obviously have to mask that off before I paint. So not too big of a deal. One thing I do recommend with this type of thing is using Bondic. If you're not familiar with Bondic, it's UV cured clear resin, and it is good stuff because it stays fairly fluid until you put the light on it. And that gives you time to position the parts. It does a fairly decent job of holding them where they need to be. But once you cure it with the UV, it's strong and hard. Harder than the surrounding plastic. So keep that in mind if you are going to have to do some sanding or some filing or whatever. In fact, it's a good idea if you have a little bit that spooges out and sticks up above the surface that you're trying to get flush to, the ideal thing is to come along with a good sharp scalpel from the side and trim those down as flush as you can before you start the sanding. You'll have a better time if you do it that way. So anyway, not too bad there. Got those polished down. Had to do a little bit of rescribing and riveting around the edges, but not bad. And that pretty much takes care of the entire wing. You have a similar situation with the tail lights. You can see there's one on each side of the rudder there, and I goofed a little bit because I already had the elevators installed, and since I have them drooped a little bit, there wasn't going to be any way to get underneath here and do any sanding and polishing of that light cover on the bottom side. So what I did is I installed it so that it was flush on the bottom, and then all I had to deal with was what stuck up on the top side. And I was, with great care, able to come in and smooth and polish that down. Sorry, that's upside down. So there you can see that all comes out pretty well. The other thing I should mention with the horizontal stabilizers, I did have some challenges getting those to fit correctly. And this is another thing that just frustrates me with almost every kit maker, and that's just the poor engineering of the attachment point with the horizontal stabilizers. I mean, it seems like this should be the simplest thing on the entire kit. You have a slot, you have a tab, maybe you have a couple of round posts, whatever it is, the fit should be just right so that these things aren't flopping up and down. But they were loose, and so I had to jig everything up and support them, to get the height right on both sides. But, some people just say, oh, well, that's just basic modeling skills. Well, fine, it is, but it's also avoidable if the kit makers did a better job. One thing that was challenging with these, though, also was that they did not want to naturally sit level when you plugged in there and shoved them all the way up against the mating surface, which is kind of complex. You can see that it's a line that runs in 3 different segments there at the root. And I had to do some work to get those 2 surfaces, the mating surface on the fuselage and the mating surface on the stabilizer, to match. And I actually ended up putting a 10,000ths shim on the bottom half of this stabilizer because again, this is a matter of picking the elements that are most important. I chose to make sure that the edge all the way around the outside was a perfectly flush match, and that left a little bit of a step on the mating face in here. So you may or may not find the same thing on yours, but that got those all taken care of. Everything else about the tail section was fine. No real issues there. The only other thing to really talk about, I guess, is around the cockpit, and you can see that I've got all of that assembly taken care of. Now this is a little bit complex because they want you to be able to have the canopy slide on the finished model, which is cool. I like that because then you don't have to pick between open or closed. So what you have is you've got these rails that you can see here that go on the top edge of the cockpit sill, and then the turtle deck back here inserts on top of it. The rails are fine, no problems with those, but this piece back here was too tight, and so I had to take some material off of all sides of it to get it to drop down in there far enough. I also had to take some material off of this rail back here because it has a piece that inserts down into the slot in the fuselage. So getting that to fit was a little bit of a challenge. But hey, at this point with this kit, I'm used to it because I feel like about 80% of the parts on this thing don't fit when they come out of the box. So, hey, yawn. It's just another day with this kit. The windscreen required some work. It would not go far enough down into the recess that they provide for it for the edge of it to be flush all the way around. So I had to take some material off the bottom side of the windscreen to get it down in there. And then I discovered, once I had it in there and glued and thought everything was cool, that when I went to put the canopy, the bubble on, that the windscreen was crooked. The front edge of the canopy didn't match the back edge of the windscreen. And basically, it was a little bit cockeyed clockwise, looking at it from this view. And so I had to drop some Tamiya extra thin in there and loosen it up and get a little bit medieval and shove this side of it over until it was straight. And that left a tiny little gap right here, which you can see. I had to come back in and fill and then rescribe. I also had a little bit of a gap over here on this side that I had to fill, and once I get some primer on that, we'll see if it needs any more work. But overall, I feel like that the mate between the windscreen and the rest of the fuselage is going to look fine. Now, speaking of the windscreen, if you're super sharp-eyed and super knowledgeable about Tempests, and you know that what I'm trying to build here is basically a late war Tempest that lived a long life and is being depicted in like 1948, that the Gunsight is incorrect. And that is where there's a little bit of a gotcha in the instructions that's frustrating. Oh, also, before I get to that though, make sure when you're doing all of this assembly with the bubble that it drops down far enough. It's supposed to clip on here on these rails, which it does fairly well. I don't know if I can do it on camera. It's kind of springy. Anyway, just check the fit, because mine did not want to drop all the way down and land flush between the front edge of the canopy and the windscreen. Yeah, which is a little bit annoying, but when you get to this point, you're not really making any more drastic adjustments. I stopped short of having to just cut the little, you can see the tabs in there that mate with the slide rails on the inside of the canopy frame. I stopped short of cutting them off and relocating them. I just did a little bit of jiggling around and a little bit of, this and that, and got it where it's a pretty good match, especially given that I don't have to have the canopy closed if I don't want to. So just something to pay attention to there. Now, back to the Gunsight fiasco. So here's the part of the instructions where we assemble the Gunsight. You can see right there. And they talk about the Mark II Gunsight, the gyro Gunsight, but they don't tell you that it's an option. It's a bonus. But they don't tell you that it's an option or why you should pick one over the other. And that's annoying, and that happens in a couple of spots in these instructions. But fortunately, I've been working all along with the assistance of this wonderful book, The Hawker Tempest Complete Guide, and I guess I shouldn't say wonderfully, because I didn't discover it until it was too late. But somewhere back here in the back, yep, here we go, is a beautiful photo of all of the Gunsights, and it very clearly says the final Gunsight used late war and in all post-war machines was the gyroscopic Gunsight Mark II. So that's the one I should have in there, but I don't, and it's too late, so oh well. It's just gonna have to live there, and I'm gonna have to live with it. So at any rate, I think that's about it. All I can really add is that I went ahead and drilled these holes here. There's actually a hole in the cowling right there, rather than just the little dimple that they give you. Let's see. I don't really think there's anything else that that I need to cover right now. So onward, time to mask and get some real primer on there. Oh, I will just mention, just if you're wondering why my primer looks the way it does, the main reason is that I wanted to spot prime so that I could check all my work and make sure that I had good quality joints. But I also chose to put all of this primer on the wing root because I'm using Mr. Surfacer 1500 as my primer. And being a lacquer primer, there's always the possibility that when I spray into a corner like this, that there's going to be some dusting. Because what happens is you get particles of paint bouncing around in here and finally landing much too dry, and so you can get a gravelly texture in an area like this. And the way to help minimize that is to spray real small, but spray at an angle so that the airflow has a place to escape. So you can see that my pattern was to come in here and kind of spray like this on this side, and then spray the same way on this side, but always with my airflow going that way so that it had an outlet. And you can see I got nice smooth primer in there. So I'm going to finish shooting the primer on the fuselage with my regular spray tip, and then I'll switch over to the fan tip on my Iwata HPTH to do the wings and the area where I've just got wide open spaces and lots to cover. So anyway, onward. Okay, so there you go. I hope that was not too long and boring, and if you're building this kit that you find it useful. To me, that's all the kind of stuff that I would want to know if I were going to get into this thing. And as I work along, I'm starting to sort of solidify how I feel about this kit relative to other kits, and I'll talk more about that in the final episode. But in spite of the issues, I still think there's a lot to love about this kit. The detail execution is really good, and it's one of my favorite airplanes. Now, you might say I'm a little bit biased because of that, and it is definitely a case of nobody else is making one, so you don't really have a lot of choice, but I'm going to be objective about the things like the engineering no matter what. And overall, the way that I feel about the engineering on this one is that somebody asked me if I thought it was poorly engineered. I don't, because the big stuff, I think their engineering strategy was pretty good. There isn't anything that's just flat out stupid that makes you want to slap an engineer, like there is, for example, like the landing gear on Airfix's 148 Spitfires. Just dumb. Or the way that the entire nose section and cowling attaches to Revell's 132nd Piper Super Cub. Terrible. Or the 6-piece fuselage in Kitty Hawk's Su-17 fitter. That's just ridiculous. Bad engineering. There's nothing like that on this kit that just makes you mad while you're trying to deal with it. At least not for me. What it all came down to was that just lots of stuff didn't fit. And it's in areas where things are complicated. And as I said before, it's just really, I think, a matter of tolerancing and quality control. So, you know, and that's the kind of thing that takes more time, which costs more money. And so I can cut these guys a little bit of slack on that score because they don't have the resources of a bigger company like an Airfix or a Revell. That really has no excuse. So overall, there's a lot to love about this kit. I'm trying to be objective about it. I think at this point I'm going to give it like an 80 or an 85, maybe 85. Yeah, but anyway, I'll talk more about that later on. So that's it. Onward to part 2. See ya. Thanks for watching. As always, I appreciate it. Much love.